when you're dealing with type 1 diabetes, that doesn't mean there won't be a secondary thing like an osteoporosis, because inevitably you're still a woman, you're still a woman with changing hormones. And yet both of those things, the underlying answer comes back to the muscle, which is your ticket is resistance exercise. And, I've interviewed some doctors who do research on longevity and protein, muscle, and I try to back them into a corner and say, of all of those, I said, what's the most important? I said, and he wouldn't say. I said, don't you agree that it's strength training, that it's muscle? Because the muscle is the foundation that allows you to do everything else. It's supporting the condition. And it's providing the energy and the desire, the motivation to be a more active person.
Welcome to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. My name is Melissa Slemp, a certified nutritional health coach and the founder and CEO of Abundant Health with Melissa, where I help women with type 1 diabetes to feel more empowered and live their best life despite their diagnosis. Each week, I will bring conversations and strategies from guest experts and my experience living with type 1 for over 40 years now. So if you're a woman ready to redefine how diabetes can look and feel for you, then the Type 1 and Midlife podcast is the show for you. Well, hello and welcome. I'm so excited to have Miss Debra Atkinson in here today to join us. She is a seasoned fitness expert and she's a best-selling author with over 40 years of experience. Debra is the host of the Flipping 50 TV and the Flipping 50 show, shares her expertise and journey in the fitness world, and she does that today with us. I'm so excited for this conversation. We get to dive into the vital topics of menopause, protein, and strength, especially for women over 40 managing type 1 diabetes. So Debra comes in and she shares her after 50 fitness formula and discusses its benefits, gives us all those details, and for all ages. And we explore menopause and protein's impact on women's health and its crucial aspects like bone health, boosting insulin sensitivity for those of us with type 1, and our metabolism. So all the things that we know we want to learn the facts and the truth about. And I share my first time going to a gym with my brother Mason and how insecure I felt that day. I still remember it vividly. But with time, I fell in love with weight training and how it impacted my diabetes care, and it continues to. Weight training and resistance training, as we call it, is something that I have been doing for years. And Debra and I both talk about our experience, not only coaching this and trying to inspire resistance training and the importance of strength, but how we too are examples of following this. So we hope you enjoy the show and become more interested on how important resistance training and upping our protein intake, as all of this is connected, as we decide we want to age stronger. So enjoy the show and let us know what you think. Nothing you hear on this Type 1 and Midlife podcast should be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please always consult your doctor before changing your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Well, hello and welcome. I am so happy to be here with Debra Atkinson. Welcome, Debra.
Well, hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a treat. I have been an admirer of you and your work and your mission for years now. And I'm just so happy to have you here to share, to share what you're going to share with our audience, because we're the same generation, close to it. I know I'm 56. I'm not going to force you to say your age. That's completely up to you. I don't think you're embarrassed by your age of anything. I think that's what separates us is that we live with a lot of joy And hey, we made it this far and we're still doing pretty good, right?
We are just getting started. I can't even remember where it was, but I just recently read this. It might have been from an Inc. magazine or Forbes, in that the difference between someone who starts up a business at age 59 versus somebody who starts up a business at age 29 is that age 59, you are like multiple fold more likely to have a successful business. And there are a lot of businesses that actually don't get started to then. So for anybody who's turning off thinking, is this a business podcast? It's not that. It's just,
No,
if you could do that, you could do anything. You could start anything
I
from
totally
scratch. So,
agree. And
and by the
wisdom,
way,
right?
I will turn 60 this year. So,
Oh,
and
congratulations. Yeah, good stuff.
like so many say, it's a
Just
number,
a
but
number. Mm-hmm.
uh in it and I really take that to heart. So often in the last 40 years, I've been asked, well, I'm X amount old, fill in your number. What should I be doing? And I'm like, it has nothing to do with your age. Like, so let's answer
Mm-hmm.
the other questions that it does have to do with. But it's not an age thing, it's an ability thing. And I know 80-year-olds who act like they're 20 and can do things 20-year-olds can't. And likewise, I know 30-year-olds who sit around like they're 90. So
Well put. It's all a state of mind,
decide.
right?
Right. Yeah.
A state of mind. Well, as you know, my listeners live with type 1 diabetes, as I do myself.
Mhm.
And my approach is to help serve and to really empower those of us over 40, generally speaking, midlife. That's a wide open term. Define what midlife is. I think it's changed. I know when I was a kid, when I heard that term, I used to think it was like 35 or 40 and that you were halfway done. So I don't necessarily know what that number is. And I don't think it really matters. I think it's just that stage where the kids are grown, where, just like you say, we should be feeling more empowered with who we are, why we're here, what our purpose is. And it really is a reinventing time. And then you tap on a chronic disease like type 1, which can make us feel a little hopeless and without direction. So that's really the purpose of the show. And I love people like you coming on here and inspiring us and giving us some concrete answers, because there's a lot of myths out there with the fitness world, isn't there, at any age?
So true. Yeah, so true. And one thing that you've said in there that makes me curious, and maybe that we can call attention to, is,
Mm-hmm.
feeling maybe without direction. I think honestly, if you have something, you have a chronic illness, you have a chronic condition that you've been carrying, you actually do have purpose. It is that, to figure out, how can I live the best with that?
Mm-hmm.
And I know this is going to sound like a very strange thing, and certainly it's coming from someone who's not in your shoes. So I know exactly that makes anything I say less of value than anything you say. But there are a lot of people who have the ability and no restrictions who are not using it.
Good
And I
point.
think
Yeah.
when you're propelled, because I need to do this, I have to do this is like a lifeline for me, you may be at an advantage, even if you've never seen it like that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And that's something that I try to remind myself of as well. There's a purpose. Like, I love the word purpose. And I like to use, and, we all need a reason, a motivation to, to plan on how we're going to do our day, our habits, feel good, live long, all those things that we don't have control over, right? But we can.
Right.
But the two topics we're going to talk about today are things that we do have control over. So I want to dive into protein and resistance training. And this is something that something I've been living for years. And it's so funny because we can look at our, and you can probably agree with me. You look at your lifestyle and what you do every day, and it kind of goes without even thinking, right? And which is probably the best way, because I don't think we should have to get up and look at a schedule and look at a list and look at that goal sheet on the fridge. And not that that's a bad thing, because we're all different with how we are propelled and how we make that step. But when it can just come naturally, because that's what's helped me all these years, is to eat a very well balanced, protein rich diet. And I have been lifting weights. I don't remember not ever lifting weights. It's always been part of my fitness routine. So, and I think you and I are good examples of when it's part of what we do, who we are, how we manage our health and our functionality and all those things. You know, my husband was saying this to me last night. He heard that a good test of our getting older and just kind of our mobility is being able to get up off the floor without using your hands.
Right.
You probably know that. And so I was actually on the floor last night. I usually do this before bedtime. I get down on the yoga mat, and it's a good time to stretch and unwind, do some breathing. It really, really does help sleep, ladies. I know I've talked about that before, but that's just another reminder. And I was able to do it. And it was funny because you get a little nervous. It's like, well, I sure hope I can still do this. So yay. So yeah.
In fact, I just released a podcast the Friday before, as we're conducting this, about 4 tests for longevity. And it doesn't make them the end all be all. There just are 4 that happen to have been widely publicized. And I did a roundup of, here's how you can test at home. One is walking speed. One is that sit to stand, or it's actually sit first, then rise with no hands. Your grip strength is another one. And push-ups, ironically, are another one.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that. Those are good things to have on hand with, no pun intended. Really good. Well, you have what's called the after, I'm sorry.
It's a lot of alliteration.
I love it. After 50 fitness formula. It's catchy. I love it. So what does that, of course, that caught my attention when I saw that. And I know a little bit about it, but I would love for you to share with my listeners, what is that? And, I think the goal today is to empower, to get, to let the ladies know that no matter where they are, they can create their own plan, that there are some things that they can do to build those muscles, to gain that bone density. And protein, obviously, we'll dive into that a little bit, is the building block of doing that. So what is the after 50 fitness formula?
Well, if you'll think about an equilateral triangle, so I may be taking some of you back to school, but that's where all sides are equal, right? So it literally is perfect. It's a perfect triangle. It sits like a pyramid. So the base of it, of course, is your broadest piece, and that's movement. So every day getting in movement. And here's where I want to make a clarification. I think some women think of walking as their exercise. I think of walking as this is our daily movement to offset all the sitting we do now that 50 years ago was not even a possibility. I mean, life was full of chores and commuting, and we just, everything's automated and with a remote control anymore, and DoorDash brings it to the door. We don't even have to go shopping anymore.
Right.
So
unfortunately.
Yeah, walking or movement every day. And if anybody is limited by, ankles, knees, or hips and can't walk, what's your equivalent of walking? Is that an elliptical, or is it, movement in a swimming pool or bicycling or some other locomotion, but that you're responsible for? So that's not according to getting breathless or going a certain distance, or it's not necessarily about getting steps in, but that would be something that counts, because your step count doesn't matter if you're walking through the grocery store, you're with a dog who stops 18 times in the block, or you're briskly walking. So that is the anchor of everything. And what's something you need to remember, I think, is that if we had more of that in our lives now, we would need less of gyms in our life. We would need less of the workouts, because that's only become a problem. We've only needed gyms on every block because we don't move otherwise. So it's an exchange for not having that movement in daily life. But the next step up is your 2 times a week strength training. And it's not that you're doing it frequently. It's just that 2 times a week, but it's weighted so heavily. It's at the bottom because it should be the next thing you're doing after daily movement. You have that strength training in your way. And notice we have not said cardio yet. So it comes first, actually. We're not talking even heavy breathing yet. but twice weekly strength training. And if you have any issue with blood sugar whatsoever, whether it's type 1 diabetes, it's type 2, it's pre-diabetes because you're a woman in midlife and now you're suddenly hearing that for the first time ever. Muscles are like a blood sugar sponge. And the way to get muscle and keep muscle is to strength train. So resistance exercise, and that might be with tubing or bands or dumbbells or machine weights or resistance, suspension. There's so many tools and ways to get it, but we have to overload those muscles for them to grow. And when we stimulate them, as we have more muscle from that second phase and we go for a walk again every day in that first phase, we're moving more muscle, we're collecting more blood sugar and removing it out better and doing an even better job of doing that. So as you climb up, the next phase is generally looking at something like high intensity interval training. And as we're getting close to the pyramid, there's a lot less of it. So we're just doing a little bit of it. We're sprinkling it in here or there. And these are the times when you're getting breathless. And generally we say, we want you to do twice weekly strength training, 1 to 2 times a week of high intensity interval training where you are getting breathless. And maybe you're going for a walk, a long, slow walk, maybe once a week, especially for those of you who really enjoy that. But every day we're moving.
Okay. Yeah. That's so simple. I love
It
that.
It is simple.
It's straightforward. There's no ifs and ands or yeah, that's a very straightforward approach. And I like the fact that you've got that you mentioned, you're starting, and this is a starting point, or is this after 50? You're saying that women after 50, optimally twice a week resistance training?
Optimally twice a week. And,
Okay.
if you were in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, I may also say that. But here's what the research and the literature notoriously says. Many of the studies will include 3 times a week strength training. And so that's what they're reporting on. But across the literature, when you look at the results from twice weekly versus 3 times weekly, the difference is insignificant in benefits and results. But one thing we do have to factor in for women, particularly in midlife, and here I'm referring to who might be going through hormonal changes that are resulting in fatigue, or the next phase for many of us is the hormonal changes are over, but the life changes are not. We have older, aging parents. We have young adult children still dependent on us somewhat for something, maybe a credit card, maybe emotions, maybe both, and we are at this middle of life where lots of things are happening. We may be changing relationships or finances or homes or jobs and looking for what's our second half. What do I want to do as opposed to what have I been doing? And so with that volatile work, we are prone to more adrenal issues and stress. So, when estrogen came down, cortisol went up. That's the body's natural solution to, I'm going to try to keep things in balance here. And that's just, the body does try to convert. So I'll try to convert cortisol into estrogen. And that conversion doesn't happen very efficiently or effectively, but yet that's what's true of us. We have more cortisol. And so we will not respond to stressors as well as we used to. Our tipping point for being stressed and having negative effects of stress is lower. And exercise, we have to remember, though it's imposed, we put it on purpose, is still stress. So when life stressors go up, the exercise stress should potentially come down. So we can control that variable, whereas maybe we can't, ill parents having to caregive or other things in our lives.
Yeah, yeah. And it all comes back to a strong foundation, doesn't it? These are habits that we need to start. And I know I've pretty much had most of these habits in place at a younger age. And I think maybe that's what helped women like you and I transition easier, because it's harder when we get older. Just like it is, I have clients that come to me that are newly diagnosed, if you can imagine, at 50, 55, 60 with type 1 diabetes. It's like, what just hit me,
Mm-hmm.
And perimenopause to menopause can feel the same way for some women. And that's something I really try to emphasize, is just to really try to focus on things like that you're mentioning. We haven't even gotten into food yet, but just these things that are so important throughout our life, and that can, they can help sustain us and help us with this blood sugar control, this blood sugar balance, and hormones. Like, you mentioned estrogen dropping. And if that does point to insulin resistance, I found this out personally because doctors knew nothing about it. I had to stumble upon that avenue in my late 40s, when I was like, why am I needing twice as much insulin for doing and eating the same thing? And I had to do my own research. And sure enough, it is found. It just wasn't shared with me. It wasn't something that came across the table, with the OBGYN, who I've now learned they are not trained in hormones, which is another whole topic. We've covered that on other shows, which is shocking to me, because we think we can go to our female, as we call it, our female doctors, our OBGYNs, and they're going to know what is going on and how all these different fluctuations are going to impact, especially women with diabetes. So we are often left out in the cold. And it's just so important. Information that we can trust. Obviously, it's not just a theory or, this one's opinion or that one's opinion, but it's founded theories that this is what happens naturally, frustratingly, but naturally.
Yeah, so glad that you said that. And I think, now, so looking at, you had to deal with it, found out about it, 6 to 10 years ago. And I think the difference between the conversation, now, even 6 years later, it's just more public, it's across your social media channels. People are talking about it. I think it's still going to be all up to us, each one of us, to vet, is what I'm hearing, is it from a, credible authority? Do they know what they're talking about? But yet having the conversation to make you ask the questions is invaluable. And this all used to be quiet. Nobody talked about menopause as if it were taboo, right? That this thing every woman ever in history has gone through. We don't talk about that. Why? As if it's wrong.
Still shocks me. Yeah. It wasn't a conversation my mother had. Again, she didn't have the conversation either. So going forward, I will have this conversation with my daughter. So we talk hormones sometimes. She's 27. So she's got her own stage going on now with in her reproductive years. But I'm just happy to be able to have the information to share with her. And just like you say, just to have that open dialogue. There is no shame or embarrassment around what's happening, just very, very naturally. So what about protein? These are two things that obviously pair together, and the recommended daily. In general, as we're getting older, we all lose muscle. I mean, just naturally, we are losing muscle. Even if we are actively resistant training, like women like you are and myself, it's still something we have to be aware of. And something that I am becoming, and this is just because women in my circle who are, again, their late 50s and into their 60s, but the bone fractures. I've witnessed 4 close friends in this past year, all with bone fractures. So I'm like, what is going on?
Goodness.
So what about that? And we know it's connected. And but do you think the connection between the protein, because again, it's all about those those foundational habits. So one kind of leads into another. So what do you think about that topic as far as the protein importance?
Well, it's definitely important. So if we're talking about muscle, we want strength training. If you're strength training without feeding adequate muscle, you're like taking the bricks out there without the mortar. They're not going to stick. And so building blocks for muscle are the essential amino acid rich proteins that you're eating. So around your workouts, ideally more proteins specifically. And here's what we need to think about. You alluded to this. Muscle mass peaks at about 25. And we can coast pretty well until about 30. And if you think back, this is probably true for more of us than not, that it was easy, to stay fit, doing anything you wanted to or doing nothing, maybe for some of you. And you were okay with your status. But, maybe 10 years later at 35, you begin to notice it's not quite the same, doing the same thing. I'm not getting the same results as I used to get. And those are just infamous words from a woman going through midlife. Those are the first things, like what I used to do isn't working anymore, right?
Exactly.
And we all can potentially say it. And even as you pointed out, if you've lifted your whole life, there may be things or components of that still have to change. Might be the number of sets you do, the number of repetitions you do. It might be the amount of rest within the sets in that workout or between the sessions per week that you do. So for women out there who may be used to, think about this. You've ever gone to a gym and started your strength training going to group fitness because that was much more fun going in and doing it with music. Think about the schedule. Often the classes are set up and repeat on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Tuesday and Thursday. So you're leaving only 48 hours between. And for some reason, the rumor got started in fitness that every 48 hours, it was time for a workout again. The actual science is that the minimum of rest was 48 hours. Nobody said do it again in 48. And many of us, as we age, the muscles are less resilient. We actually will do better, be fitter, gain more lean muscle, and repair it when we work out if we rest another day. So anybody who's out there a little sore, a little tired, not feeling quite ready to work out again, that may be intuition telling you take one more day of rest and then see how you feel. It might also be that you're not as well hydrated as you could or should be, or haven't had as many calories at the right time. So the timing of your food may not be actually helping you feel the energy that you could have if you tweak that a little bit. So I think as women, we're notorious for short sheeting ourselves with calories, maybe always trying to play that game that if I eat fewer, I'll lose weight. And at midlife, we're finding the opposite is true. Women have played that game so much, it's coming back to bite them in the butt with fatigue and slowed metabolisms. And we can turn that back on. We can turn it back on, just exercising correctly. Not necessarily more, but correctly. But back to the protein. Number one, hit for a lot of women, if you're feeling, I have no energy to lift weights, I don't even know what you're talking about, you're not talking to me. I get you. But often, and very surprisingly, when I started about 10 years ago teaching a 6-week course that evolved into something very different, the first week, I just challenge everybody. What I'd like you to do ultimately is eat this much protein. But this week, just keep track of how much you're eating and see if at one meal, where could I bump it up? And they inevitably would come back after week one and say, I can't believe how much more energy I have. And they hadn't changed their exercise yet. That hadn't come yet. But I never suspected. I didn't expect or suspect that would be their response, but it almost always was. So realize that if you're not feeling like exercise, maybe you don't try yet. Maybe what you do is try looking at what can I do to my diet to change it? Maybe not eating more, but maybe just tweaking it so you're getting more protein at each meal and see how that feels after a few days.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, we're steering right back to balance and that foundation and the building blocks. Yeah. Yeah. So we got to start out with what's going to fuel, in this case, the muscles and another myth. And I'm going to share a story. I remember when I was early 20s I was always active as a kid. I used to play tennis on the tennis team. And, we were active as kids. Our generation just was. We biked and played, and we were outside a lot. And my younger brother, invited me to a gym here in the same town I still live in. And I was so scared. Number one, I wasn't confident in how my body looked or felt. And I remember, I still have that memory of walking into that gym that seemed so overwhelming, barbells and leotards everywhere, and just feeling completely like a fish out of water. And I never left. It took time. He took me under his wing, because he was more active in weight training at that point. And I just trusted. And, I think I immediately fell in love with just how my body was responding and how I was toning up. And of course, I was still, I was living with type 1 then as well. So, and my blood sugars were not as in control as they are now. So I immediately saw the benefits to that. But it goes to show you too, because I think the gym atmosphere, and it depends on the gyms, if that is where people choose to do their workouts, they can be intimidating. Even fitness classes can be intimidating, right?
Mm-hmm. Such a great point. And I think, I talk to gym owners a lot, and have been a consultant, pre-pandemic. I really have not gotten back into this. Number one, because we're very busy doing our own thing. But, it is ironic that a lot of gym owners, not all anymore, there's a good percentage that are females, but male gym owners often are the ones designing the weight room. And they're not designing it based on female preferences. Like, females have a preference for colors of the sunset, and you walk into a gym and that is not what you're going to find. Yeah. The music playing in the weight room, it's certainly not what I would put. I don't know. I wear earphones, not just because I want to listen to music. It's because I don't want to listen to that.
Right. I totally agree.
It makes me tired, that they're playing. So they are not catering, interestingly enough, to what is a great opportunity, I think. I mean, because women in midlife, we now are at the point where we can afford, or if it's a budgeting thing, we're willing to budget, because it is an investment in our future. We're banking on our longevity and our enjoyment of whatever that longevity is. And they're not actually paying attention to the females, and what's going on. I had this conversation with a practitioner recently in an office, and her brother was the physician who owned it. She was a practitioner in it, providing some services. And she said, he's actually willing to do some remodeling because he knows I hate these rooms. Like, they're so cold, because he designed them with his color scheme. And I said, well, who are the majority of your clients? Oh, females. I'm like, well, then his opinion doesn't matter.
Right. Isn't that interesting? Got to open your eyes and your ears. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think we still find that there may be like women's only, here's the women's only room, and I don't know that that's all bad. I think some women actually prefer that and enjoy, then I don't have to be self-conscious. I can go in there. I can, not feel like I need to be made up, but also not feel like it's a meat market or somebody's staring at me, and I'm very comfortable. Right. But I also love now, at least where I am. And so I'm in Phoenix, and I'll maybe just put that out there. It may be geographic, but I love going to a gym and realizing that many of the young women are in the weight room, not on cardio. It's like, amen. We're doing something right.
I'm seeing that as well. I've been a gym. It's ever since that day with my brother. I mean, I've been a gym member ever since. And my husband and I are very active in just the outside paddle boarding. We do paddle tennis, all kinds of paddle sports. It's so funny when you throw the word paddle in there for everything, but it's just funny how it works out. And, walking and running with the dog. And we have a rower in our house. We're real lucky to be able to hop on the rower, which, as you know, is full body. resistance and, some cardio. But our local gym, it's very community based. It's got a really good vibe there, and it's something for everyone. I mean, we've got small kids all the way up to seniors that are taking part in some area of that gym. There's an outside pool, there's pickleball. And this is not like some club, like a fancy club type of a gym. It's very modest. It's just very functional, which I love, and it's very inviting. So there has to be more of those out there. So I am assuming, because I noticed that there is just groups of women, and there's some of the classes that I take as well. There's such a camaraderie and a community, and they love going in there and learning and doing. And I don't see as quite as many, depending on the age group, upstairs in the weight room, but they are doing some resistant training inside these guided classes. So I see a huge shift as well. So it's not just the aerobic, the Jane Fonda aerobic step class that we used to see right back in the 70s and 80s. There wasn't a whole lot of resistance training in those days. I don't think there was as much awareness as the importance of bone density. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think since about 1995, we started really talking about that. And, in 1995, we had to educate people on what osteoporosis was. It is now a household word. Everyone knows, men, women, young and old. Interesting.
Yeah. And
but
yeah.
But we also are understanding now that whereas in 1995, when we first began talking about it, anybody who was diagnosed, it was like, oh, we have to bubble wrap you. You shouldn't do very much. You shouldn't step off the curb. I mean, it was be extremely careful. And we instilled fear in people, and we didn't know any better. We were using the best science we had, but in medical fields, it's do no harm, and that spilled over to the Medical Fitness Association. And so there were no research studies on women with osteoporosis doing anything but very, very conservative exercise. Well, guess what? Since about 2015, we started doing high impact and high intensity with them, and no one's getting hurt. And we're reversing bone density. We're reversing it. We're not just putting the brakes on, which is what we used to think. That's all we can do is slow the losses, not even stop them. But now we're reversing it. Super exciting. Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah. So this is obviously a program that you specifically pay close attention to and serve as far as your population, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And you can do this at home. You can do it at a gym. It's number one, probably is find where are you most comfortable getting started, and then get started.
Yeah.
And I think there's still always going to be that fear of, won't I get hurt if I'm lifting weights? And I will say this. So, if I could profess that this would be the mic drop, is your injury risk is far greater not lifting weights than if you are lifting weights.
I love that. There's a quote. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I mentioned this the other day. I was talking with somebody about this topic because she was fearing she was just diagnosed with osteoporosis. And I think, the first thing that she thought of was, and we kind of talked into this, was how it's going to impact not only that fear and those next steps, but how it's going to impact being able to stay, within movement, and how important that is to manage blood sugar. Because, we talk about steady state, you mentioned that at the very beginning, walking is very good for blood sugar balance. It's one of the best things we can do after a meal is just move, just get up and take a brisk walk. Brisk is the operable word. Get the dog that wants to pull you like mine. And it's definitely going to burn some glucose. But I think that is where it's so easy to take a back step with your health, especially with living with type 1, where it's tough enough. And then suddenly you're giving this diagnosis that your bones are brittle. You're afraid. You're afraid to make those movements. You're not sure what to eat, and then that's another whole part of it, because then they're just prescribing a bunch of calcium, it's assuming, oh, just eat more calcium and then your bones will get stronger. And there's much more to it than that with the vitamins and minerals that are essential to build strong bones. But
Yeah.
It really is about, wrapping our arms around these women and really trying to just instill that it's going to be okay. There are some sound things that you can do.
Yeah.
And just like you say, yeah.
Yeah. And to anyone who's just gotten that diagnosis, if you are exercising and you hear that, one of the things that I try to say, and it's not that we're not taking this seriously, but I think that if you got the diagnosis today and you were an active person last week, the only thing that changed is that
Yeah.
So it may not be that you need to change this week what you're doing. I mean, we may need to get more precise about your exercise prescription. Is there a way that we could load those bones more consortedly with more specific effort for the result? That's a point where maybe going to that exercise group class is not the best thing for you. Maybe we need you to get on some machines, lifting heavier weight and doing protocols that are specifically in science quoted as increasing lean muscle mass. I wrote You Still Got It, Girl in 2015. And with the publication of that, some of the more popular group fitness classes that are strength training to music and choreographed and everybody's doing, they won't throw a specific name under the bus, but I think everybody probably knows what I'm talking about, were not shown or were shown not to have a positive result on bone density. And the reason most likely that those studies came out negatively like that is that there's one instructor, most likely. There's a class full of people self-selecting their weights that may or may not reach muscular fatigue. The repetition range, quite frankly, is almost always 12 or 15. We're not getting to lower repetition ranges where the weight is heavy enough, and your muscle will respond to almost anything. You can do really light weights a lot of times. You can do moderate weights, medium times, and you can do heavy weights fewer times. Your muscle will respond to all of it, provided you almost reach muscular fatigue every time. Your bone will not. Your bone is not responding to light weights many, many times. It's not enough stress to the bone. It's not responding to the medium unless you are just starting. Start here because that's smart. Over weeks and months, progress to medium, and then keep progressing. And you will be increasing your bone density benefit as you come down. But the optimal is working as heavy as you can. And then when you can't, because of a condition or an ill bone or joint issue, you may simultaneously have osteoporosis and arthritis. They're two equal and opposite exercise prescriptions. So what do? You do the first, no harm. We don't cause harm, right? So we're not going to cause harm to the arthritis by dictating to the osteoarthritis or osteoporosis. But what you might want to have to look at is, what else can I be doing? Like with my dietary intake, what can I do with decreasing stress? Because that's an impact on your bone as well. And tools like whole body vibration might be something you want to look at. You can get on the Power Plate is a brand. So whole body vibration comes in different things, but it allows you to stand on it, to put a foot on it, to balance on it, to do some exercise on it if you're able to. But those for more frail or more limited are great ways to get some insurance. But you can find them in gyms and clubs and Ys. You can buy them for home use if you can invest.
That's really good. That's really good information. Yeah, yeah. We can't say that we don't have choices out there. It is about hearing you specifically talking about it and advising. So I really appreciate that. And something that made me think of just trying to get these things that are important, especially for women with diabetes, how important that protein is, quality protein. Do
Mm-hmm.
you agree with 25? I've heard, in general, this is how I coach as well. And it depends on the body size, all of that. There's a lot of variables as to how much we need, and of course, men need more based on their body weight and all of that. But generally speaking, 25 to 30 grams per meal, averaging 100 grams per day for
So
the
in
average size
general,
woman. Mm-hmm.
I would do, I, here's how I would qualify it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is no less than 100 grams a day.
Mm-hmm.
And to make it easy, although also hard for those who are not eating that much right now,
Mm-hmm.
a gram of protein per pound of body weight
Yeah, that's a
is
good
generally what
calculation.
you're shooting
Yeah,
from.
a gram per
And
pound. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
here's the first place I start is, how about if you just track what are you getting on average for the next 5 days so that you know? Because we don't just want you to start shooting blanks and try to get a number that is just incrementally maybe
Right.
2 or 3 times as much in some cases of what you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
How about if we just find out what your average is now, we start working on how do we get more at breakfast? What else
Mm-hmm.
could we do? Could we get a little bit more at dinner and lunch, and how can we do that?
How?
Be
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but if
Yeah.
you think of it as a prescription medication, right? And it says on the bottle, you take one 3 times a day with meals. You would never take that bottle and say, "I feel like I just need one of these today." Or, "It's been really inconvenient. I'm just gonna have all 3 of them with dinner." You would never, ever, I'm hoping, ever,
Right.
ever, ever do that, right?
Right. Good point.
And
I like that.
and
Yeah.
the whole, exercise is medicine, food is medicine. So if that's true, we also know that protein should be taken in a dose response. So muscle protein synthesis, as we talked about, we lose it. And we get to a point in our 50s and 60s, now we're noticing that we've been losing it. It has been happening. It's not like it suddenly happened, but we're really noticing. Women will notice it a little bit more than men because we lose our estrogen kind of like that. Men
Mm-hmm.
kind of come in for a coast. It's not as dramatic. They definitely will find it catch up with them. But when we notice that, it again, it took decades for it to get there. And we don't have the muscle protein synthesis we used to have. So us at 50 or 60 or 70 don't have the ability to utilize the protein from the food we eat to the benefit of our muscle in the way we did when we were younger. And those of you who have diabetes, I'm preaching to the choir, you also don't have that as well because you're struggling with the blood sugar level. So that definitely supports what you're doing, trying to offset blood sugar levels. But what we want to do is make sure we get up and over the hill. So if you imagine you're riding your bicycle up a hill. By the way, it's not an electric bike. Can we just say that?
It's a
Okay.
real pedal bike.
You're pedaling, yes. And you're riding it up a really steep hill. And you know how that feels when you're at the top. You're not quite getting over. And if you don't get that second wind, you're not going to get over and you'll have to get off. And either you fall back down or you have to
Right.
walk it. Well, with muscle protein synthesis, if you don't reach that 30 grams, you don't get over the hill. We haven't raised the muscle protein synthesis to help you sustain and keep the muscle you have. We're still in a catabolic or a breakdown state. So, 2 things boost our muscle protein synthesis: resistance training and that at least 30 grams per meal. So, if you can get 40 or 50, there's not a limit to it. And very recently, we're talking as we talk right now, within the last 2 or 3 weeks, a study came out that said, counter to what we've always believed, that there's an upper limit of what we can absorb, there's not. your body will kind of utilize what it can right now, but it's also going to come back and keep working on that, and it can keep utilizing protein. Still, it's to your advantage to take it like the prescription med in equal doses throughout the day to keep that muscle protein synthesis up. If you have a really high protein breakfast, you're only coming down a little bit. You may not need to have quite as high for lunch, just have a little bit to bump it back up. And so you can spread it out throughout the day in a way that works for you and not ever feel over full or overstuffed. That's certainly not the goal, but we need to get that. And 30 grams seems to be where we have enough essential amino acids at that meal to matter.
Yeah. You just said a really important word, essential.
Yeah.
Protein is essential.
Right.
Just like the fats, right?
Yeah. And the essential amino acids that we have to take in on a daily basis and that our bodies can't make. That's an important distinction. Yeah.
And one of the things that I notice and practice myself is how, like when we are building a plate of food, I'm a big vegetable eater. I push vegetables and I love that. I think that's where the carbs, the non-starchy carbs really should be coming from first. And protein needs to be a significant part of that plate as well. And then some healthy fats. But what happens when we can really focus on those things that are going to satiate us, keep us strong, keep the bones healthy and strong, is that it sure helps with blood sugar control, because it kind of takes that guessing game out when we're not filling the plate with the pasta and the rice. And I'm not beating up the carbs. I'm just putting it in perspective, because the body doesn't necessarily need the carbs unless you're a marathon runner, right? Or whatever that high performance athlete is. But generally speaking, as we're aging, it's real important to be more cognizant of how much carbs we really are putting in. And as we're getting more insulin resistant, obviously that's putting more of an insulin load in our system, which is inflammatory, which is putting weight on. So all these things that we're trying to mitigate as we're aging, it can, and it's going to help other things. So obviously the same formula that you just mentioned at the very top of the show, it works. And it especially works for women with diabetes. And it really is just recognizing really what our body needs. And I know it's not easy. Maybe we get on here and we talk and we think, oh, well, they make it sound so easy. No, it is just about taking steps and, I'm having an action plan, buying the right things at the grocery store, scheduling those workouts, those strength training movements, because it matters, ladies. It definitely matters. Yeah.
Yeah. So agree with that. And I think the other thing to really consider is if your exercise is making you crave carbohydrates or sweets, you're not in your sweet spot for exercise. And or you might want to look at the protein and the fiber at your last meal as well for satiety. But when you're doing, maybe it could be too much cardiovascular activity, not enough. And it may be that it's too middle of the road as opposed to doing the low level activity and or occasionally doing that higher intensity interval training where you're go high for a little bit, come back, completely recover and repeat that. Those kinds of activities, and when you're in your sweet spot, your craving should be lessened. You should have a nice and a healthy appetite, but not an outrageous, out of control appetite. So if that's not where you're at right now, it's just a clue that something could use tweaking. So use it as data. Yeah.
Really good point. Yeah. Yes. We know a little bit about data living with diabetes.
Right.
We're a little data driven. What's one more point of data, right? Well, if it helps keep that formula in balance, I'm all for it, right? So it is all about learning. Well, is there anything that I left out that you want to add and share with our listeners? I think we kind of came full circle talking about, all those important things as we are aging with resilience and with more strength.
I think you've hit on so many of the things. I think, when you're dealing with type 1 diabetes, that doesn't mean there won't be a secondary thing like an osteoporosis, because inevitably you're still a woman, you're still a woman with changing hormones. And yet both of those things, the underlying answer comes back to the muscle,
Yeah,
which is your ticket is resistance exercise.
absolutely.
And, I've interviewed some doctors who do research on longevity and protein muscle. And I try to back them into a corner and say, of all of those, I said, what's the most important? I said, and he wouldn't say. I said, don't you agree that it's strength training, that it's muscle? Because muscle is the foundation that allows you to do everything else. It's supporting the condition, and it's providing the energy and the desire, the motivation to be a more active person. And it allows you or enables you to do the things you need to do to build the bone density. So it all simply comes back to muscle. So the one thing that I would recommend that maybe we haven't mentioned is measuring it. So we talked data points, but making sure you have a smart scale and you're monitoring your lean muscle mass, not in percentage, but in mass. So pounds or kilograms, depending on where you are in the world. But making sure that that number never, ever, ever goes down. If anything, it is going up, because that is your ticket to blood sugar control.
Awesome. Yes. Yes. I love that. Absolutely. That is so good. Now, is that a measuring stick that we can, how easy is that to find?
You can get a smart scale.
Smart scale. Okay.
Yep. So you're looking for a smart scale, no more dumb scale. So that one in your bathroom scale from 1982 simply is a needle telling you, what weight is. It's not telling you enough information. You could be falsely celebrating a weight loss that includes muscle, which is going to come back and bite you. And exactly where, I'm not supposed to say, right?
Yes, yes.
So smart scales can be purchased from $25 to $350, the Rolls Royce of them. Okay. Probably somewhere in the middle, or $75, you can get a really good one. And the numbers you want are definitely body composition. So it's percent body fat. And from that, you can calculate backwards. But if it also reads lean muscle mass, or your skeletal muscle mass, not as a percentage, but as pounds or kilograms, those would be the two data points that tell you far more than just weight alone.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Most important. Well, thanks a lot, Debra. I really appreciate you and being here. You are a world of information. I know you have lots of places I can send my listeners. You have a lot of gems. You have your own podcast, Flipping 50. The Flipping 50 show, and you have programs going on. So is there anything specific that you wanted to point to? And we will definitely link all this in the show notes as well.
Absolutely. So we do a 5-day flip for anybody who is not moving now, not yet, right, is what we want to say. So this is an easy entry, easy access. In 5 days, I send 15 to 20 minute one video a day. So it's either strength training or it's how to do in high intensity intervals, but you're doing it with me. I'm in my living room. You'll be in yours. Midway through the week, you already get a recovery week. So I'm showing you how to do a high quality core exercise workout. And the whole idea is just to have you do 5 days in a row, convince yourself that, yes, I do have time to do this and the energy to do this.
There you go.
And yep.
Commit. Commit to you.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you. And I'm going to link all that. I can't wait to share that with our listeners to get them going, get them started, and a way to reach out to you if they want to learn more. So thanks again, Miss Debra Atkinson. You are a gem, and have an amazing rest of your day, and everybody here. And we will see you back in here same time next week. Bye for now. Thanks for tuning in to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review right here on iTunes. And you're invited to connect with our Type 1 and Midlife community on the free Honey Health app. Here we discuss the podcast topics in a group chat, a chance for you to ask questions and take action on what we share here on the show. You can find the app link to download for free right here in the show notes. And for free resources, you can visit me at abundanthealthwithmelissa.com. And your support means so much. Thank you.